Hi, One Lit Teacher here to talk a little bit about the themes in Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. When we think of Romeo and Juliet, we automatically think of the idea of love versus hate and fate versus free will. So I'm going to start with those major themes in this play and also follow up with a few others. Most people think of Romeo and Juliet as a true love story. It is, after all, a story about a pair of star-crossed lovers who are willing to take their life in the name of love. We think of love at first sight. We think of love so deep that it cannot be broken even in death. When Romeo meets Juliet at the Capulet feast, he is so taken by her that he can't stand to be torn apart, and instead of leaving with his friends, he goes back and goes over the orchard walls looking for her, and we get that famous scene in the balcony. And Romeo says to her, "With love's light wings did I o'erperch these walls, for stony limits cannot hold love out, and what love can do, that dares love attempt." What Romeo is essentially saying is that love knows no boundaries. Nothing can stop it. And so again, we get this idea that this must be true love. Juliet picks right up with it and runs. She says, "My bounty is as boundless as the sea. My love is deep. The more I give to thee, the more I have, for both are infinite." And it's lovely, but if you pause to think about it, it might seem a little silly and a little out there because Juliet has only known Romeo for all of a couple hours at the very most. They've hardly exchanged more than a few sentences with each other. And so we might pause for a moment and think, is it really love or is it lust? Would Romeo and Juliet still love each other next week, next year, in 5 or 10 years? After all, the relationship between Romeo and Juliet lasts all of 4 days. That's right, folks, 4 days. You can follow the calendar in this play and see that their love is not a very long one, and that maybe they sort of jumped the gun, so to speak, in being willing to die for each other because they couldn't even really know each other that well. Friar Lawrence says, "Young men's love then lies not truly in their hearts, but in their eyes." And this is one of those sort of counter ideas that I was talking about that might lead us to examine the theme of love a little bit differently and look a little bit deeper beyond just what the two star-crossed lovers have to say about it themselves. Another major theme is the idea of fate. And again, that same quote, "A pair of star-crossed lovers take their life," is our first introduction to the theme of fate in this play. And of course, Shakespeare uses the idea star-crossed because during medieval and Renaissance times, people believed in astrology and they believed that the position of the stars at one's birth determined the outcome of their lives. But I think Shakespeare doesn't necessarily believe in fate and may be more a proponent of free will because in several plays, not just in this one, he seems to offer up moments where characters could make other decisions and sort of be saying through the characters in the play at moments that people could make other choices and be in control of their own destinies. Some famous quotes dealing with fate in this play happen throughout, and Romeo says very early on his way to the Capulet party, even before meeting Juliet, "I fear too early, for my mind misgives some consequence yet hanging in the stars, shall bitterly begin his fearful date with this night's revels, and expire the term of a despised life closed in my breast, by some vile forfeit of untimely death. But he that hath the steerage of my course direct my sail on, lusty gentlemen." So Romeo is basically handing over his decision-making here. He says that fate, or he who has the steerage of my course, will just lead the way, and he sort of relinquishes control of any decision-making, which I think is pretty foolish. And I think Shakespeare shows it as foolish in the outcome of the play. When he meets Juliet, he says, "Is she a Capulet? Oh, dear account, my life is my foe's debt." Again, he sort of just succumbs to the idea that he doesn't have a choice here. I would say the exact opposite is true. Of both of the love interests that Romeo discusses in the play, they are both Capulets. It's like Romeo purposely chooses that which he cannot have because that's just part of his personality. Other people like Benvolio might tell him that there are lots of other fish in the sea, so to speak, that he could go out there and play the field. But Romeo has this idea that he's limited to 2 women in Verona. It seems sort of peculiar to me. Juliet has a similar response, and remember that Juliet's very young, only 13, and very inexperienced. When she meets Romeo, she says to the nurse, "Go ask his name. If he be married, my grave is like to be my wedding bed," which is very fatalistic and again, relinquishing control of her own destiny. And when she learns that Romeo is, in fact, a Montague, the only son of her great enemy, she says, "My only love sprung from my only hate, too early seen unknown and known too late. Prodigious birth of love it is to me that I must love a loathed enemy." Again, she is resigned to the idea that she has no control here, which I think is rather foolish. Benvolio says to Romeo, "Be ruled by me, forget to think of her. By giving liberty unto thine eyes, examine other beauties." In that moment, of course, he is talking about Rosaline, and he never knows about Romeo's love or infatuation, as it were, with Juliet. But nonetheless, it seems to me that Benvolio has a much healthier idea about love, along with the friar who says that young men's love then lies only in their eyes and not in their hearts, or truly in their eyes. I would say that Shakespeare's message here is actually choose free will over fate, because going along with the idea that our destiny is predetermined is pretty dangerous, and that is shown by the outcome of this play. Some other themes that arise in the play are, very importantly, mental health. And I wanted to start here because I want to say you should take note that both Romeo and Juliet threaten to kill themselves multiple times throughout this play before it actually happens. And people like the friar and the nurse should take note and take heed and help them. Suicide ideation is a very prevalent idea among teenagers, and this type of depression is very, very dangerous, as we can tell from the outcome of the play. So in discussing the play Romeo and Juliet, or thinking about it, we should make sure not to dismiss the idea of mental health and the opportunities that are missed in this play to help the title characters. Another important theme is sex. This comes out right away in the opening scene, where the servants from either side are talking about cutting off the heads of the maids, or taking their maiden heads, and so on. The nurse has some very bawdy lines about sex, as do Romeo and Mercutio when they're joking around and punning with each other. And of course, we know that Romeo and Juliet consummated their marriage on the wedding night, although Shakespeare only suggests it by having them wake up together, because actually having a sex scene on stage in the Globe would have been prohibited and unseemly in the time period. Also closely tied with sex in the play is the idea, unfortunately, of violence. So remember that the servants who are talking about sex and making bawdy jokes at the beginning of the play are also joking around about the rape of young women, which is absolutely not funny. But we have to think about the context of the play, then the time period that Shakespeare wrote it, and what some people might think of as acceptable at the time. I would submit to you in the final analysis that Shakespeare actually has some sympathy for women, because in this play and others, he puts them in positions in which they are trapped and lets us see how that turns out. Of course, other violence in the play is connected with the feud, the ancient grudge that breaks to new mutiny, and the deaths of several people in association with that feud. And that brings me to revenge. Revenge keeps the ball rolling in this play because, for example, Tybalt can't get over the idea that Romeo shows up at the Capulet party, and so that's why he offers a duel to Romeo, and so on. Don't forget, Lady Capulet is revenge hungry and wants to send somebody to poison Romeo in Mantua, and so on. So revenge is an important idea in the play as well, as is death. I want to point out to you that it is not only the star-crossed lovers who die in this play. The catastrophe is pretty complete. 6 people die. The total death toll is 6 characters. And I don't want to spoil it for you if you don't know who all 6 are yet, but count them up as you read or watch. This is a sweeping catastrophe. And of course, there's a lot of talk of the family tomb or the sepulcher and of death at the end of the play. Marriage is another major idea in the play, which is also connected to the ideas of gender roles. Juliet must be married in order for her to be happy and successful, and she cannot pick her own husband. Capulet has arranged a marriage with Paris for her because that will afford her wealth and power in the community. And so social constraints also play a role. Marriage, gender roles, society, all those things are intertwined in this play. And again, I would suggest that Shakespeare actually has a little bit of sympathy for the females, in this case, particularly Juliet, who is really trapped and doesn't have a lot of options to make choices on her own. Another idea which ties in with those is religion. And so they must be married in the church, for example. Even Romeo and Juliet know that when they run off to be married by the friar. And of course, the friar is an important religious figure in the play. I think importantly, Shakespeare does not make the friar, a source of wisdom that is unimpeachable, because the friar actually makes a lot of bad decisions in this play. And so Shakespeare might be saying that there is good and bad represented in the general idea of religion. Another idea related to that is youth versus old age. So the friar gives Romeo advice, and he's much older, but perhaps not much more experienced, at least in the ideas of love, than Romeo. And there are a few other older characters in this play, like the Capulets and the Montagues, the parents, for example. It's interesting because while Shakespeare presents the youthful characters as very capricious and often very foolish, it dawns on me that the older characters are not really very wise, and they are not really great role models in this play either. So that's kind of an interesting counterbalance idea. Also, the theme of family loyalty is obviously very important in this play, and that ties in with the idea that the feud is something that no one can even really name the reason for anymore. It's just an ancient grudge, and anybody who aligns with either side just knows that they are supposed to be in a state of anger and hostility towards the other side. And again, it's part of the foolishness of the way that people act that Shakespeare is highlighting in the play. So these are just some of the themes in Romeo and Juliet, and I would challenge you to read and watch the play and come up with a few more, because there are certainly a rich tapestry of ideas that are woven together in this play by Shakespeare. If you enjoyed this presentation on the themes in Romeo and Juliet, I hope that you will subscribe to my YouTube channel, One Lit Teacher, and check out my other videos on Romeo and Juliet, on other plays by Shakespeare, poetry by Shakespeare and John Donne, and others, as well as an ever-expanding list of videos about all things literary. I hope you enjoy. Please subscribe. One Lit Teacher.